candlelight night last night, didn't we? For those who were there, it was really great. And don't you all love that little clip that's on our website? I just love that. I get so excited whenever I take my laptop to visit new pastors. I always just say, don't listen to me, I'll just put that in 1.5 minutes and you know all about Australian Christians. Thank you, dear. So look, my topic this morning is faith, threats to freedom of belief. And for those who were there last night, you probably see a clear demarcation between religion and politics from last night to this morning. So yeah, what I'd like to do is begin by putting this topic in a slightly bigger framework and draw from a great yet challenging lecture that I attended at the University of Sydney recently. Professor Patrick Parkinson was speaking on the topic of religious liberty and the law. So it was a bit heavy. He summarised well the challenges that we face, and so if I could put it in a sentence, the greatest threat to all freedoms, including freedom of belief, is the new moral principle. It's the new moral principle that's considered the highest moral principle. And it's a new ideological movement, and it's called equality. The notion of equality is becoming the human right that trumps all others, even freedom itself. The notion that all beliefs, cultures, faiths and relationships are all equal. This is the new moral standard being promoted by human rights advocates, and holding any other position is clearly seen as a human wrong. Now, this is despite the fact that people are leaving their own countries to come to nations like Australia that they consider better. Now, when I went to school, better meant better, actually, not equal. It meant better. But in our age of equality, saying an idea, a belief, a culture, or even a relationship is better, that is now being called racist. So that's one of the challenges that we face. Professor Parkinson gave an overview of the history of the equality movement, as it's called. And he pointed out that in civilised nations, the boundaries of equality and freedom are constantly being renegotiated. The movement started with pretty good objectives, actually, initially dealing with the inequality related to race, gender and disability. And initially, gender was addressing male and female equality in law. But later, this was expanded to different groups to protect every diversity imaginable. I'm sure that Bill will go into that. Breaking society up into lots of self-interest groups. And we all know where self-interest leads. Apparently, Mark Twain said, "God protect me from self-interest masquerading as moral principle." How true today, we could share that prayer. Professor Parkinson noted that from a legal perspective, protecting self-interest leads to limited freedom and increased litigation. It's all good for the lawyers. In biblical language, we call it bondage. This is promoting a culture of less self-control and more state control, heading us in the opposite direction desired in any free liberal democracy. Now, I normally address the subject of freedom of belief as it pertains to a particular threat, the rising Islamisation of Australia, something also facilitated by the political left and human rights equality movement. Freedom of belief and freedom of association are closely connected. We all know the saying, birds of a feather flock together. Isn't that cute? And it was refreshing to hear Professor Parkinson acknowledge the obvious. The fundamental beginnings of freedom of association occur from primary school when kids naturally form associations with like-minded persons. He even noted the idea of boy and girl germs, something that divide us early. Now, we know that kind of language won't go down too well anymore in our gender-neutral training. But I think we all remember those natural associations that freely form. That is freedom of association. Freedom of belief and association is the reason we have had exceptions for churches included in anti-discrimination legislation, so faith-based groups can employ those of like mind and belief. Now, I was in the recruitment industry for a number of years, as a consultant myself, and in the corporate market it's exactly the same. People choose to employ those who are compatible with their company culture and their values. It just makes sense, doesn't it? It's just common sense. Oh, why would you employ someone who is opposed to your beliefs and values as an organisation? It's just ridiculous. But common sense is a shrinking virtue in the so-called equality movement, where freedom to believe that some ideas are superior to others is considered discrimination and, in fact, criminal. These thoughts are obviously on the road to totalitarianism. It's only common sense that people wanting to share the benefits of living in Australia should be embracing the common core values that make Australia what it is. Freedom, democracy, equality and the rule of law. These are so important. When we see Australia, in the name of diversity, starting to embrace Sharia compliance, that's Islamic law, Sharia, the Islamic legal standards, we should recognise we are actually embracing something that undermines the common core values that make us who we are. Pursuit of truth must remain a higher value than attributing equality to everything. And for those who study their Bibles, it is obvious there's a clear connection between truth and freedom. This is a very serious subject. Islam is steeped in shame and honour ideology. Islam must be honoured and shame must be avoided. That's the theology. Truth is secondary. This is why it fits very well with the political left and their equality movement, because they too want to honour, to appease and validate every self-interest and to avoid shame. There's no shame anymore in anything, is there? We can't be ashamed anymore. That's just like Islam. Respect is demanded and truth is also secondary. That's very bad news for Christians. We have truth as our core. We worship a person called the truth. This is a very important point. So while in so many ways Islam and the political left are fairly odd bedfellows, I must admit, Islamic expansion can be legitimised because non-discrimination this new equality is the highest moral principle, and the fringe must be moved to mainstream. And that's what we're seeing happening, is the fringe moving to mainstream, which is why we need a Christian political party to get into place. The highest moral principle highest moral principle effectively hijacks a number of human rights for just one human right. As a result, Professor Parkinson says that people of faith are seen as being against morality. That's true. People like me are called right-wing extremists and immoral. People like you and I, because we are traditional, conservative. But this applies more to Christianity because we don't embrace the broad road. That sounds familiar, but the narrow one. The opposite to the so-called doctrines of inclusivity and tolerance. And while Islam demonstrates its intolerance every day all around the world, we are told in Western nations that this is not Islam but a hijacking of a peaceful religion. I thought we should really know things by their fruit, but of course that's old school. We're told Muslims believe in Jesus, and if we were more tolerant, we would accept Muhammad. The freedom to reject the idea of Muhammad as a prophet is increasingly being denied everyone. The net result of this push for diversity can only be organisations becoming less diverse, simply because we all have to think the same way. That's what diversity brings. It's quite ironic, and we have to start pointing out what is so obvious, really. As Melanie Phillips identifies, the world has been turned upside down. We have the European Parliament objecting to the appointment of a European Commissioner of Health because apparently Mr. Borg's Catholic beliefs and opinions are incompatible with European values. Can you believe that? Gosh, how dreadful. Incompatible with European values. I suppose that means he thinks he's free to have an individual opinion and he's not thinking like the group. So how does this affect us as Christians, and what role is the worldwide revival of Islam playing in all the lunacy on the left? Well, whether it's the political left or the Islamists pursuing their form of totalitarian government and Sharia law, the push is continually to the intolerant and discriminatory left, especially in what are supposed to be fledgling democracies. This year, on March the 8th, which was recognised as International Women's Day, the Egyptian Parliament, note the Parliament, not Al-Qaeda, not a fringe group, the Parliament, chose to celebrate the day by calling for less human rights for women. You may be aware there was outrage earlier this year when women were subjected to virginity testing in Egypt in 2012. The Egyptian Parliament, in calling for less human rights for women, condemned the 1978 UN Convention Against Gender Discrimination as being incompatible with the values of Islamic Sharia. But we're told we have universal values. It's interesting that Catholic values are now incompatible with European values, and what we call universal values are incompatible with Islamic Sharia. We're all getting along nicely. I think these are both revealing that eternal godly values are really being undermined. Religious beliefs have political consequences because different religions have radically different values and produce different types of societies. You know, it's not rocket science, is it? We are what we are because of our beliefs. It's so straightforward, but nobody can see what's so obvious. Islam is not really a religion that values freedom. That is the truth. In fact, I was once thrown out of a mosque for uttering the F word. I'm referring to freedom. Look what is happening in Egypt. Last week, I was advised that the clear prohibitions against slavery in the former Egyptian constitution have been removed in the new draft constitution because slavery is a Sharia-approved Islamic principle. The whole Islamic religion is based on a theology of slavery rather than sonship, which of course is blasphemy in Islam. So neither does the draft constitution in Egypt include a clear ban on human trafficking.